Welcome to everyone to another episode of the Human Factor podcast in HSE. I'm truly excited to have you here. Today is going to be a bit of a special episode. I'm really excited about sharing the knowledge to everyone who is within the HSE space, because I think that what you're going to hear today is going to be a huge eye opener for a lot of people, and it's actually going to open up a lot of opportunities for people to do really great stuff and further their own career development, and also further their opportunity to follow passion in a stronger way. And today I have Michael with me, and he's the CEO and founder of Yellowbird. Welcome to you, Michael.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great stuff. First of all, thank you for setting time aside. I can understand that you have an extremely exciting day ahead of you. So I think that we're going to just jump straight in, and then we'll see kind of where it takes us, because there is a lot of interesting stuff that we're going to cover. But first of all, can you give a short introduction to kind of yourself? And I always ask people where they are at in the world, because it's quite interesting.
Yes, thank you. And it's the beginning of my day where I am, and it's the end of your day where you are. So this is always fun for me. I love global conversations, and you realize that we're all part of the same world, and we are all trying to do the same thing in HSE, which is get people home safely every day. And it brings a human factor into what we all do. So thank you for having me. I am in Phoenix, Arizona, so I am on close to the west coast of the United States. Right now it is 8 a.m. in the morning. It is a beautiful morning, and I'm happy to be here. My background, giving you just a little bit about me and how I came into the industry, is actually quite an interesting path. I was in fiber optics for years and years, the foundational elements of the internet, and in the 90s. I might be older or maybe not than many of your listeners, but I've been in technology a long time, pretty much most of my career. And I ended up getting out of fiber optics after the bubble burst in 2000, 2001. And I ended up getting into satellite communications. And for your listeners who don't understand how satellite plays into HSE and safety, when you're in a high consequence world where you're dealing in oil and gas or mining or construction or infrastructure and utilities, you tend to be off the beaten path of traditional cellular or mobile phones, particularly in the 2000s, early 2000s, and early in the technology boom. And so I was doing a fair amount of emergency phone systems and emergency satellite phones and so forth for what happens if somebody gets injured? What happens if there is heaven forbid, a rig site explosion or an injury, or somebody gets caught up in something very bad? And so I had to understand what the expectations were for response times and what the expectations were for all that. And so through and it sounds like such an off the beaten path journey, and it really is, but I got a passion for the HSE side of the house, and understanding the human aspects. It can be very dry in technology. You get removed from people very quickly. It's all zeros and ones, and at the end of the day, I like doing things that impact people. And so after I got out of my satellite business, I was fortunate enough to exit the satellite business, and I did all right. And I was able to start thinking about what I wanted to do. And it was when all the gig economy platforms were popping up. And I was seeing some things in the low skill world, things like, and there's nothing wrong with it, but the Ubers of the world and delivering food, and where you have to have a driver's license and a good driving record and a reliable car. But that's probably in a willingness to work, of course. But beyond that, almost anybody can do it. My son, who's 18, he delivers groceries in the afternoons to make extra money. I mean, it's a good gig for many people. I thought the gig economy could be great for knowledge workers, thinking of lawyers, thinking of accountants, thinking of architects, people who are specialists and experts in their field. And then, of course, because of my background, I knew HSE, and I know how many rules and regs and things that are involved in compliance and insurance and all the things that are necessary to run a sophisticated program, and thought, you know what, I think this could be very interesting for people in our industry. So that was how Yellowbird was founded.
Nice. And now that you mention it, why the name Yellowbird?
It was originally not named Yellowbird. I am not the greatest marketer in the world. I will admit that. I do like to speak about my passions, but from a creativity perspective, the first name was actually Zip, and you're not going to like this because you're in HSE land, but it was called Zip EHS, because EHS in the US is more common than HSE. So it was Zip, like ZipRecruiter or Zips. I mean, all the Zip of the early gig economy companies and matching companies. EHS. And when we started, actually launched the business, I hired a marketing agency, and it's a tip of the cap to the canary in the coal mine. And we are actually going to be coming out shortly with our own at Yellowbird. We're going to have a podcast coming out called Canary in the Coal Mine. But essentially, Canary in the Coal Mine, it's a tip of the cap to the first safety tool, essentially, which the canary was there whistling next to the worker. They'd go down there with their lunch pail and their canary, and when oxygen levels got too low, the canary would faint. And that was the first indication that we need to get out of here. We're lacking oxygen. And so it was a nice little tip of the cap. The agency, frankly, came up with it, and my, at the time, 10-year-old daughter, or 9-year-old daughter at the time, loved the birdie. So that's kind of how it came to be.
That is an amazing story. I must say, they really did a great job. I think that a part of that, no one is ever going to forget that story. Whenever they hear that story, it will stick with them. Okay. And I definitely think that the logo and the branding behind it is really well crafted. So I think you did a great job on investing in some marketing people. That's really amazing.
I was fearful at first, to be honest, because one, it was kind of a strange name. It took me a little while to come around to it. But I was also fearful because you always hear about these brand stories, and then you find out you go into other parts of the country and, maybe a yellow bird is a bad omen in some part of the world or something like that. I've always had in the back of my head that there was a story of MGM, that MGM Casino, that apparently they're walking through a lion's mouth was taboo in certain Asian countries, and they actually had to redesign part of the MGM brand's front door because they were blind to that realization. And then they said, "Why are our Asian clients not coming?" And that was something I read an article on. I thought that was interesting. I don't want that to happen to me.
I can appreciate that because it is a bit of a work to get the branding rights and kind of getting the story behind it. So changing that over time can be kind of tough, to be fairly honest. So in your world, and kind of from a 50,000 foot view, what is it that Yellowbird is providing to the world?
So unfortunately, to the whole world, we're not providing enough yet. We're mostly providing it to North America. We are doing some global work, but they're U.S. companies. So they're U.S. workers that are going to other parts of the world to keep safety in the field and to basically help with safety programs. So the easiest way of describing what Yellowbird does is that if you look at an HSE professional, they all have their secret power, right? Everybody has certain things that they really love to do, and their background is in a certain industry. And they are familiar with other industries. They can do it in other industries. But most people, actually all people, have a journey. And whatever that journey was, they learned a lot during that journey. And that's the area that they have unique value and unique skills. When an HSE professional registers on Yellowbird, and it's free. So you just go to goyellowbird.com and you fill out your profile, and you can upload your accreditations and certifications. You tell us about yourself. You can put in your resume if you have one, or your LinkedIn. And we build essentially a profile that we take all the data and the keywords and the things that you have. Then we use a little bit of Yellowbird secret sauce. And when a customer comes in and they say, and I'll give an example, let's say that an oil and gas group comes in and they say, we want an on-site safety person for this rig for 3 months. And we are not just in oil and gas, but we are in gas, and we are in, the northern territories, and it's very cold, and you have to deal with some safety matters that are in the very cold environment. And we are, again, drilling from natural gas. And so there are certain things that are necessary from a safety perspective. That person with a cold environment, working in natural gas, being on drill rigs, understanding OSHA compliance and all the requirements that you have for in that scenario, we can match to that skill set. They could be the same certification as any other, but if you don't have that uniqueness, like there are thousands of people that have, and I'll be arbitrary an example and say a CSP, a Certified Safety Professional cert. But the same person who's going into a coal mine is also going into a laboratory, a clean room. Those are not the same people. I mean, somebody who grew up with muck on their face going down a coal shaft and knows how to handle themselves in a coal mine. It's not the same person who's going to feel necessarily, you don't want to generalize, feel comfortable at Pfizer in a, in a clean room laboratory, right?
Definitely. All right. So that's quite interesting. So if I were, let's just play the role, right? So I'm an HSE person. Am I out of the job? Is it full time with you guys, or can I have my own job, or how's that structured?
So we find that there's really 3 types of people that are on our platform, and we don't accept everybody. Just, we actually do background checks. We validate people's certifications. It's, of over 4,000 people who have registered on our platform, which is quite robust. We have about 1,100 that are match ready, as we call them, which is we've gone through the full process. So we have about 1,100 people that have gone through the full process that can be deployed tomorrow. So I apologize. I actually forgot your question. I'm embarrassed to say.
No, but that's perfectly fine. So I was asking, how it works, and you mentioned there are 3 types of people that are, if they're full-time employees, or
yes.
How does it work?
Yes. Thank you for that. It's 8 o'clock. I haven't had enough coffee, obviously. So there are full-time employed people who are willing to consult, and they take generally a PTO day, a paid time off day, and they will come out and maybe they'll do like a safety training. We do a lot of things like an OSHA 30, if somebody has their OSHA 500, that they can become a trainer. And that's in the US, of course, for OSHA guidelines. Maybe they do forklift training. Maybe they are doing document review, and they're doing it in the evenings. We do a fair amount of that kind of thing, or program creation. We've had groups individuals who, they'll make, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 working for us to create documentation around a certain programs because they have a specialty. That's one type. So they're full-time employed and they'll take time off, or they'll be able to figure out when they can work. We won't place them in their own company, and we won't place them in a direct competitor's company because it's just poor form. The other part are individuals who've been running their own consulting practice, and they want to help find new opportunity. We are very stringent in not allowing for folks to circumvent us, and so there's guidelines around that. We're very careful that if a job comes through Yellowbird, it's a Yellowbird interaction, and so we still facilitate all of that. And then there are the individuals who, in the back of their head, always wanted to consult, and maybe they've retired, and they say, because everybody says this, "What are you going to do when you retire?" No, I'm going to golf. I'm going to do some consulting. And the thing with this industry is many of us, and I can't speak for everybody, but many of us aren't salespeople. And to build a consulting practice is hard. I mean, you have to go and network and go to the Rotary Club and maybe go, you've got to figure out a way to generate business. So that's one of the things that Yellowbird does if somebody ever wanted to create their own consulting. And so we can help with that. And I guess the next question, the natural question would be, well, why wouldn't they just do this themselves? Why would they use Yellowbird? And for us, we do some very important things for our consultants. We have over $5 million of insurance that we put them on. So we cover their professional liability insurance, their general liability insurance, extended auto coverage for when they're driving to and from locations, as well as occupational accident coverage. So if they get hurt on the location, we actually have insurance for them, which is an important piece of this equation. We also do all the billing and receiving on their behalf. And we also do all the marketing on their behalf. And we pay them in 48 hours. So you go and do a job and you complete that job, we will pay you in 2 days. And the speed of payment is really the kicker, because collecting from some of these customers is horrible. And they know you're small and they know you need it, and you don't want to burn a bridge because you keep following up. You don't want to follow up every day. And, it's like, well, they owe me like $3,000 or $4,000. I could really use it. It's Christmas. All of that stuff plays into our value proposition. And so we think because of that, that's why we take a percentage. The vast majority goes to the pro. We average around 30% that we get. So for every $100, $70 goes to the professional. And I think there's enough value there that it's worth it for them.
Way more value. So don't worry about that. It's a completely fair deal, because just if you were to just fulfill one of the things that you mentioned, either getting the business is 30% worth, and then getting paid from huge clients is also 30% worth. So if we're just aiming one of these, it's a really nice thing to do. And I actually think that a lot of people underestimate how much energy it takes to build a business. Mm-hmm. And especially people who are kind of going towards their retirement age, they think that their network is going to do it for them. And then they have maybe 10 people to call, or 15 people. And then when they have called them and no business showed up, they're like, that's strange.
Yes.
So I think that it's really something that's extremely well off that you're doing, because there is a lot of experience that would go lost either way. Like if people just went to retirement, and all of that great knowledge and experience that are inside them would just not go to be used.
I haven't said this quote in a long time. So, and I'm gonna say this quote, and I apologize because I don't know where it came from, but I do know it's a Native American quote. And I used to use it early days. I've raised a couple of rounds of capital for the business, and we were mainly focused on the retired community. When we launched, we were mainly focused on the retired community. We ended up focusing on the entire community, not just retired, because I was getting people that said, "Can I sign up even though I'm working?" And it's like, "Oh, sure, yeah, absolutely." And so that's kind of why we broadened. But there was a quote that I used, and I'll say it now because I've mentioned it 3 times, which is. And I'm paraphrasing, so I apologize if I mess it up. When an elder dies, it's like burning a library. Mm. And I think of that when people retire in this community. You've got 30, 40 years of experience, 20, 30, 40 years of experience. You've seen so much. You've all this wisdom and stuff to contribute. And in most circumstances, this industry pays well. And so you likely can retire and be okay. And not, hopefully have saved and all the things you need to do to be stable. But the contribution gets lost. You stop being a member of the community. All your knowledge. And I know this because when my dad retired, it happened to him. He was a president of his association in his industry. He was there for 35 years. And then when he retired, he wanted to sit on boards and he wanted to be a consultant, but he wasn't a salesman, and not much happened with it. And that's why Yellowbird, that's actually one of the foundations of Yellowbird. And I think that whole being able to give to others is probably the greatest value of being a Yellowbird Pro. The staying relevant and staying involved.
Definitely. All right. So from a curiosity point of view, how do you qualify the 1,100? That must have been a tremendous amount of work.
It is a tremendous amount of work. Fortunately, I'm a tech guy. So the vast majority of our process is actually done with technology. So that's one of the ways that I early on was having people say, well, you're not an HSE guy. How do you know? And I often say, the people who create QuickBooks the coders that create QuickBooks are not accountants. And the people who create the barometric pressure machines are not necessarily scientists. Just because you serve an industry does not necessarily mean that you have to be the expert in that industry, as long as you're consulting with experts in the industry to make sure that you're properly representing them. And we do. We have many, many relationships that have helped us. So what we do is we do validation of certifications when somebody has a cert. So we will actually we call it an API call, but essentially we go out machine to machine and we validate that the document that someone uploaded is valid. And if it is not digitally validated, then we have a team they're basically interns that will do the research and validate it. Yep. We also do spot checks throughout the network. And we track when people's certifications are coming up. We have relationships with the accreditation and certification companies and universities. And so they want us to validate, because they don't want people representing that they have something that they don't. They're very careful about that, saying, if I say I'm a CSP, well, I've done 5 years of work to get there, and I've taken the tests and I've studied, and it's a very prideful thing. They don't want somebody just going and throwing CSP after their name. And so they support us in this. And so most organizations that offer certifications actually have reached out to us and offered to help us validate the cert.
That's amazing. So then the cheeky question is, why aren't you just then validating the rest of them, or they didn't live up to the credentials, or what's the reason? Because it's 2,900 that's just waiting, or what's going on there?
Well, they're not done yet. Okay. So it's not that they haven't been cut off. They're in process. Okay. But one of our validation processes, so this is the technical side you're talking about. There's also the social side that is very important in this industry. It's the hardest part to match. If I'm being really honest, I can look at your CV or your resume, I can look at the data, and I can say this person is absolutely qualified. They've been 20 years in the oil field, as an example, or 20 years in the construction industry. They've worked with drywall. They can deal with airborne particulates. They're an industrial hygienist, and they have a CIH or whatever the cert happens to be. But, pardon my French, but how do we know if you're not an a-hole? Right? How do we know you are a good human being that are going to treat people respectfully, and that are going to show up on time, and that are going to do the job with professionalism? And so part of our process is how are they moving through our process? Are they diligent in how they're filling things out? We do check on them, and we make a phone call to them. Are they rude? Do they not do what they say they're going to do? Hey, can I call you back in 10 minutes? I'm on another line. Yeah, no problem at all. Give me a call back in 10 minutes. You don't get a call back. We note that. And a couple of those dings, of course, people could be in the middle of an incident, and They can't call you back, and that's perfectly fine. But if you get like 3 or 4 of those indications that somebody's kind of a jerk, we don't pursue them further. We mark them as non-matchable.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that over time we're going to get better and better at. When people say, what's your secret sauce that could make you better than any other? That's the piece. Figuring out, and the ratings and the scores are also part of that, kind of like Uber, right? Somebody has a 4.999 and they've had 5,000 reviews. You're pretty confident you're going to get a pretty good experience. Yep. Somebody has a 2 and have had, 500 reviews with a 2. That means that there's a lot of people who had a bad experience.
Yeah, definitely. So if you don't mind, then let's try to look upon it from your customer's point of view. What is it that they're getting from Yellowbird?
So we talked about this before the camera came on, that the industry is filled with a lot of knowledge. Unfortunately, it's really, really hard to have 1 or 2 or 3 people who really have a solid grasp of all of it. It's also very, very difficult to execute a proper HSE program in the field. And so our customers primarily are using us for volume. So I'll give you an example. If you run a machine shop and you have 40 locations across the country, and you know that you need to do respiratory fit testing for the people who use their masks. So you need to go and get fit tested for all those people with their masks annually. How do you execute that? And I have a director of HSE or EHS, and I have maybe 3 or 4 people on staff. If I'm lucky, probably not. Probably 1 person that's responsible for all of it. They come to us and they go, wow, so I don't have to send Bjørn around to 40 different locations on an airplane, staying overnight, doing all of this stuff. Bjørn can become the puppet master, essentially, the air traffic control, and you can be managing each of these Yellowbird people to say, okay, when are you going to be out there, and you're doing it via our platform. Here's what I want you to do. Here's the document we need you to fill out. And you can execute 40 sites in 15 days, and that would have taken potentially a year, because you have other parts of your job that you're needing to do too. That's the thing. Some of these field work jobs, people are like, well, I have people that do that. And the reality is absolutely do. There's no question. There's nothing that we do that somebody internally can't do. The question is, while you're doing this tactic, this program, what about all the other things that you should be doing as well? Right? You have to kind of put a pause button on all the other stuff that you have to do because you have, oh, shoot, I have to go do this. And heaven forbid there's an incident or an accident, and you have to go do an incident report or an accident report. You've got to deal with the insurance or loss control and claims and all that stuff. Now, whatever respiratory fit testing or a machine guarding assessment or forklift training, or it can go on and on. Hazardous materials management program, that all goes on hold when there's an accident. It's like, okay, we got to get down there. I'm getting on a plane tonight. Sorry, honey, I know it's Christmas Eve, but I'm leaving. And you're gone. And now everything stops. And that's what we're solving for.
Yeah. And here comes something where I find it extremely interesting. And I don't know how much data you have on this at the moment, but what's the biggest request that you're seeing?
It's we keep track of that, actually. We track that very, very closely, most candidly for marketing purposes. If we're getting the same requests over and over, we're like, okay, this is a pretty big market, right? We're not a very old company. We're only 3 years old. We've grown very, very large. We're in all 50 states in the U.S. We are starting to expand in other territories and so forth. So the number one request changes, but I'll tell you, our bread and butter is mock OSHA inspections, where somebody says, look, we're coming up for our annual review with insurance. I want somebody to come in and do a mock walkthrough. And we do a lot of that kind of work, both for the company as well as for the insurance companies. The other thing that we do a fair amount of is the insurance companies will hire us to do loss control surveys for them. Because as we all know, when the broker goes to the owner and they say, well, you fill out this form, so a loss control form, The owner starts filling things out that they may or may not be quite as confident in their answers that they should be. And the broker gets paid for getting this thing through, so they're not going to put up a red flag. And then the insurance company has to carry the risk. The claim comes through, the insurance company is paying. Or the insurance company is now fighting because they can prove that you actually falsified the document. And it's not a falsification, it's they probably didn't know. I mean, that's the reality. Somebody says, do you have a sprinkler system in the attic of the building? And you're like, well, I'm walking around here and I see sprinklers on all the roofs. Yeah, there must be sprinklers in the attic. I'm saying, yes, I'm not going up there. Check. Well, many buildings don't. They've got sprinkler systems in the dwelling area, but not in the attic. Well, that is actually something that can affect your ability to receive money for a claim. Because you said you had this and you didn't. So we do a fair amount of that kind of work. And then we also do a fair amount of company internal compliance. So I'll give you an example of, let's just use that machine shop. Let's just say that a company decides to use a self-insured methodology, or they'll take the first $1 million of liability that they'll cover themselves. So it's coverage over and above $1 million. Well, that company now has $1 million of liability. They might want to run their own loss control surveys at all their locations, because they're in for the first $1 million. They're carrying that. That's their responsibility. So whoever committed to that, they got a lower premium on their insurance because they said, I'm going to cover the first $1 million, right? And so a lot of companies are hiring us to go do walkthroughs on their behalf. And so as an example, we would view, say, a retail environment. We'd go do a slip, trip, and fall assessment at every one of their sites. Maybe in a manufacturing environment or a fabrication environment, we would do a hazardous materials assessment, but also do their rinse station and their eye wash stations. Because you'd be surprised how many eye wash stations are now used as bowls for bolts and nuts and stuff. Until somebody gets a splinter of metal in their eye and they run over to the eye wash station and they look down and they can't splash their eyes because it's now a bin full of bolts and nuts and screws.
And has that changed? That those two that you mentioned as the biggest request, has this changed in the lifespan of the company? I know it's only 3 years, but are you seeing there's a change coming?
It's an interesting question. We don't have that big of a data set. We have about 300 customers, which is pretty good in 3 years. We've done well. And those customers can include big insurers who do lots of repeat business. I signed a deal. Well, I didn't, but the company signed a deal to do site surveys for 2,000 locations. It's very exciting. It's a rinse and repeat kind of a job. It's going to pay very, very well to our pros. So if any pros listening to this, sign up, because it's going to pay very well. They will be our highest volume request immediately. But does that mean the industry has changed? That's one customer, right? So we can skew with data real quickly here. And so I always try to look at our data in 3 ways. We look at how many jobs we've done in aggregate. We look at types of jobs we've done in aggregate. And then we also look at consolidation. So as an example, let's say I had 40 different construction sites that were doing temporary safety staffing. They had temporary safety people coming out to those locations and being on site. It's great application. It's a win-win because most construction companies don't have enough safety staff to oversee programs during that duration. Various durations are higher risk. Move in and move out days, having extra safety hands there, good idea. So you could have those 40 locations and 40 people, but technically it's 1 job per location. So that's only 40 jobs, which is a lot, don't get me wrong. Where I do a gig that has 200 site surveys, that's a higher volume, but it's 1 customer. versus 40 customers, right? So
Yep.
you just, I look at things very differently as a geek.
I understand that,
Geek
and it's very self-realistic, so it's a really great approach. But if you then put yourself in the chopper and kind of have the overview of the HSE, where do you see it's changing from and towards as a whole in general?
So there are a lot of technologies that are coming out right now that I'm very excited about, and some that I'm not excited about, but have value, but I'm not excited about them. It feels in this industry, there's a lot of people that are trying to get data gathering and highlight risk through computers. And so there's groups that are monitoring sites through video cameras and are seeing, near misses with heavy equipment, or they're seeing ergonomic lifting points where people are bending improperly. And that's actually not a bad thing, but it feels very Big Brother-ish. It feels very intrusive, but I get it. I understand, but it does feel very, and look, you're at the work environment. Your company they're doing what's necessary to keep you safe. They should be. And that's what it's all about, is keeping people safe every day. And so I get it, but there are different pluses and minuses to all this stuff. So there's a lot of technology around that is interesting, but what most of the technology does technically is it raises a flag that says you need to improve here. What I like is that we are actually feet on the street that can help people truly improve. So let's just go back to those cameras that see the near misses with forklifts. Well, that's actually really, really great, because that's a good technology. You use those cameras in blind corners. You don't use them everywhere, so people are watching everything that you're doing all day long. But maybe you use them in blind corners or in areas of high risk. And then you say, all right, we need to have somebody come out every quarter and refresh proper forklift safety or proper heavy equipment safety etiquette. The three most risky things you can do on a job site: heavy equipment, lifting, and climbing heights. Those are the three things that will kill you fastest. Of course, the fourth being confined space, run out of oxygen, get caved in on, things like that. We have people that can come and do training programs around those. And we're very, very practical. And it's what some of the venture capitalists don't like about us, because there's a lot of moving parts. We're doing it with tech. There's a lot of moving parts. And so I guess the quick answer is I see the industry becoming bigger. And that's the best part for me. I see people valuing, not just saying, but valuing safety programs, valuing, if we give access to training and give access to walkthroughs and give access to localized talent, I see people saying, okay, I wouldn't have paid $5,000 to do this, but I'll definitely pay $1,500. Like, if we make it more economical, and that $3,500 that isn't being charged went towards air flights and car rentals and food and beverage and and hotel rooms. The consultant was never getting that money. The people in consulting sometimes come to us and say, "You're trying to drive down pricing," and the reality is I'm actually technically not trying to drive down pricing. Technically, and my customers are going to hate me to say this, I actually want to increase the wage to HSE. I want to decrease the overhead. I want to decrease the stuff that they have to pass through for $1,500 plane tickets and overnight stays at the hotel and the rental car. And if I can get a local person that lives locally who tries less than 40 miles, that's a win.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. We see quite eye to eye on that one, because I think that regardless of how great the technology that's coming out there, as soon as we put a human being into the working situation, there is a risk, because we are humans and we come to work with different types of history, different types of moods, different types of situations, and that can vary in a very, very quick moment in time.
Yes.
And as long as we have that factor in there, we need to have other people to educating them on how it is that they should act in that particular situation. Obviously, when we only have robots, then we don't have to worry about it anymore, but we're not quite there yet. And the predictions are that we still need people to come to work regardless of how many robots that are there. So I completely agree with you that we are in a rising market, and especially when it comes to just people paying attention to the situation that they're in is just going to go through the roof, because it's going to be easier and easier. There's going to be a lot more protection. There's going to be tech that's telling you you're not lifting correctly, or there's tech that's telling you you're driving the forklift wrong, or now you're showing signs of being fatigued. I also interviewed a guy who they're doing a new tool where the operator needs to do a certain amount of cognitive training before he goes on. And it registers if they're not to their own baseline, if they're below their own baseline, which is great, but they're still not having the tools and trainings to actually go and say, all right, so if you're below your baseline, what do you do? Well, then there's no room for improvement, so to speak. That's what gets me excited.
That's an interesting tech. That's an interesting technology. I see pluses and minuses to it. My first instinct there as a business owner is, what is this going to do to the project timeline? So somebody comes in, they're a little groggy. They go to get into the equipment. They can't open up the rig door before they go and do their cognitive test, and they fail. Is the company willing to wait till the next day, or make the person go and take a nap and go do it again? Are they willing to wait the 3 or 4 hours?
Exactly. That's where it's exciting, right? Because tech can tell us what the problem is.
Right.
But it can't necessarily show us the solution whenever it's evolved around the human mind and the human being as a person.
And it's hard. It's a hard decision. I can tell you right now, as a business owner, you've got a whole lot of money on every hour we're sitting, and now we have somebody who showed up and they're tired, and they shouldn't have been tired. They should have been ready, and you're frustrated and everything else. But you have to make a hard decision there. It's like, okay, it probably cost me, I'm going to be arbitrary and say $10,000 an hour, or it's going to be $100,000 an hour. Do I make the person go take a nap for an hour, or now that I know that they're impaired in some capacity, what is my ownership of this? But
you got to give them credit, right? You got to give the organization credit for actually introducing the software, right. And then we need to see what are they going to do with the results?
Yes, it's fascinating. It'll be interesting to see. What protocols they put around for. Good results. It's kind of like it's easy to go to ideal scenario when everything works. How do you react when everything doesn't work the way it's supposed to, or you do identify a risk that it's intended to identify a risk? Okay, now you've identified it. What do you do? What's our plan? And what the plan should be, by the way, is cross training. Just so you know, I'll give you an answer. It's cross training internally, so somebody else can run that equipment. So it's not the only person that can run that equipment, and so
obviously,
so you don't have to, so that you don't have to stop, but. I'm not going to just throw this company under the bus because it's a great technology and I like it. But the answer to that riddle that I just gave is making sure that there's 2 people at all times are trained to do the job in case one person can't.
Definitely. That's one way of going about it, right?
Right.
And
I'm sure.
But it is quite interesting what's going to happen. As you mentioned, there are a lot of great technologies coming out, and it is going to be a very exciting time. Michael, I want to thank you for actually taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know that you're in a very exciting process right now, so it means a lot to me that you would take the time to actually spend it with me today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I always end the podcast asking, is there anything that you think that I like asking you when you look upon the time that we spent together right now?
No, I think we really covered some great ground. I'm a little saddened myself that we're not in all territories. I know you have a huge following around the world from Europe and Africa and other places, and I'm sad that we're not in all of those places yet. We're mostly in North America, and we do send people overseas, but they're U.S. citizens. So I am disappointed for ourselves that we're not going to be applicable to some of your listeners. But that being said, time will come, and we will be international. We will be global. So thank you so much for letting me talk today, and I hope you learned a little bit about technology and Yellowbird. Anything you want to know about Yellowbird is on goyellowbird.com. It's like goyellowbird.com. And I'd love for any of you that are listening to feel free to sign up or use us if you have needs. I'd appreciate it.
Beautiful. All right, Michael. Once again, thank you so much for taking the time. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Bjørn. Have a good evening.